Do you feel like your OCD is loud during your birthday?
Yes, it is because I'm hyper aware of how I'm feeling. Right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, it's my birthday. I should feel special today. I should feel
Mm-hmm.
good today.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I'm very tuned into whether or not I'm feeling good. And if I'm not, oh my God, why wouldn't I feel good? It's my birthday. OCD does a lot of that questioning,
Same.
and then add in the fact that I have the existential stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
I turned 42, and I'm
You're
looking at
dying
my
tomorrow,
kids.
Liam.
I know, I know. This
We're
is it. I
basically
am
dead.
hurtling toward the grave. I just think that the reality is that with OCD, unless you're really far along in your treatment and recovery from it, the big days are the ones where we struggle the most, whether it's a
Yeah.
birthday, a holiday, whatever, because it just magnifies that you're not where you want to be and the rest of the world seems like they are.
I'm Alicia.
And I'm Liam. We both have OCD. And instead of spiraling alone, we decided to turn our symptoms into a podcast. You're welcome.
Here, we overshare real stories, laugh through the anxiety, and talk to actual experts who can explain why your brain keeps asking, what if I accidentally marry my cousin?
Whether your thing is hand washing, mental rituals, or just silently panicking during normal conversations, congrats. You have found your people.
This is a safe place, unless you're an intrusive thought, in which case, get in line, buddy. We're booked.
So grab a weighted blanket, cancel your plans for the 5th time, and let's dive in. This is the OCD Confessional.
And yes, we did check this recording 4 times before uploading it.
Today, we're thrilled to welcome Jeff Bell, an award-winning journalist, acclaimed author, and powerful storyteller. Jeff is the author of Rewind, Replay, Repeat, and When in Doubt, Make Believe. And he's been featured by outlets like the New York Times, CNN, and the Wall Street Journal. Through his work and his own lived experience, Jeff speaks openly about adversity, advocacy, and choosing purpose over fear. We're honored to have him with us today. Welcome, Jeff Bell.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with you, Liam and Alicia. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We are so excited, and the people get like an hour to listen to the dulcet tones of Jeff Bell.
You're going to make me blush.
Jeff is a former radio host, still a radio host, former radio host. Yes,
Former
out in
radio
California?
host, retired in 2022.
Well, good for you. Yeah, but he's got that radio voice. I always wish I had that. People who listen to the podcast know that I was in TV news for 15 years. I don't think I could have made it in radio without the voice, but
That's okay. I've been told I have
a
a
great
face for
voice.
radio too. So we play to our strengths, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. And we'd like to start with a confession. It can be a compulsion, a ritual that you still perform or used to perform, where you look back and think, wow, that is wild that I used to do that.
Yeah, so I was ready for this because I know that that's something you do with this podcast, and I was going to say I was thrilled by this. Actually, my doubt bully, my voice of OCD, was thrilled by this because one of my most prominent compulsions over the years has been confessing. So the doubt bully loves that you're giving me an opportunity to share with your audience all kinds of horrible things that I have done and that need attention and so forth. But can I share too? Because this is just such a great opportunity.
Yes,
Yes,
do.
please.
Okay. Well, the first one I think will speak to you, especially Liam, because of our news business connection. And it sort of gets at the heart of my elaborate double life for so many years. As you mentioned, I worked in radio. And back in the early 90s, I was a field reporter for KCBS part-time. And my job, of course, was to get to the scene of a breaking news story, a fire, a homicide, an earthquake, whatever that might be, as efficiently as possible, get there quickly, and then tell the story. Well, telling the story came easy for me. I've always been sort of a storyteller, and that part of reporting was really easy. But the getting to the scene of the story became very challenging because I had an early diagnosis there. I'd just been diagnosed, I believe, during this stretch. What's often called harm obsessions and compulsions, or hit and run harm obsessions and compulsions. And the fear was always that I would unknowingly cause some harm, and through my negligence, and if I didn't go back and check on things, something horrible was going to happen, or something did horrible happen, and I needed to confess it. So I would be working at the station, and an assignment would come in, and they'd say, Jeff, we need you to go out to the scene of a triple homicide in the East Bay. And so down I'd go to the parking garage in the Embarcadero Center in San Francisco, and I would take out our news van and drive towards the scene of the story. Well, once I ran over a pothole, maybe 2 or 3 blocks away, my doubt bully, my voice of OCD, would say, "Was that a pothole or somebody you ran over?" I mean, classic OCD, right?
Yep.
So I would turn the news van around and go back and check to see that there was a pothole in the road. I'd feel a little bit better. I'd drive off. The doubt bully would tap me on the shoulder and say, "Well, you saw a pothole, but does that preclude the possibility that there was also a dead body nearby?"
Right.
So I'd turn the news van around and go back and check again and again and again. Well, this got so bad, and there were so many, questions about where's Bell and why isn't he reporting on the story, that I had to get creative. And unbeknownst to my bosses back in those days, I would take the news van out of the parking garage, park it a block or two away, so at least it would have the appearance of having left to go cover the story, and hail a taxi cab and take a taxi cab out to the scene of the breaking news story. You want to see an interesting look on a cabbie's face. So I need to go to the triple homicide. You can stay in the car. I'm going to go report on this and I'll get back in.
No.
So
Wait, how many times did you do that?
Oh my gosh, I lost count. And Alicia, not a great way to make money when you're
so
spending it all on cab fare, and I'll tell you what, my former boss at KCBS, a great guy, when I shared that story with him when the book came out, I've never heard him laugh harder. He said, "I had no idea you were doing that."
Bless your heart. And we know now that's a really common one, but back then you had no idea that other people were also experiencing the same exact thing. That's a really common one.
Exactly. And so
Wow.
the second one, and I could go on for hours, and I won't, but I share one more with you because I think it kind of speaks to my life today. And I also like to put on the table because you're going to see me doing some weird head motions and whatnot. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's about 2.5 years ago. So that's part of my journey right now, too. And I can tell you there are a lot of lessons from OCD that have applied to battling this particular challenge as well. And there are some great punchlines in there about being worried about one of my dyskinesias, flailing arms or something, actually harming somebody. And my OCD wants to check. But this was a great connecting of those two as well. Shortly after I was diagnosed in 2023, I went public with the Parkinson's diagnosis. And I'd been blogging for Psychology Today, and I wrote a blog about this new challenge. And I published it and got some nice feedback from people and all kinds of wonderful support and so forth. But then I realized that I wrote Parkinson's disease, which is abbreviated as PD, as Parkinson's with a capital P, disease with a capital D. And that's not the way the protocol is within the field. Parkinson is capitalized, disease is not. And my OCD got a hold of that, and I wanted so badly to go back and edit the whole post and everything. And I thought, this is the perfect blending of my Parkinson's disorder or Parkinson's disease and my OCD. So it's been an interesting mix in the past couple of years.
Oh my gosh. The number of times that I think I've told Alicia this, that I check every text message I've sent to make sure it's grammatically correct, or then I'll get worried that the person hasn't responded because they're upset about what I said. And so then I go back and look, did I say something rude and forget that I said it? I convinced myself I must have said something really offensive. So I mean, I'm to this
We
day,
get it.
I'm constantly checking my text messages and making sure I didn't call Alicia a bitch in my text or something.
You wouldn't do that.
Never.
No, he might. The podcast itself has been the biggest form of exposure for us because there's so many things that go into it. Listening, did I say something weird? Did I offend? We had that episode with Chrissy, and Liam, you don't know this, but I went back and asked her if I offended her. So many times I had to make sure before we aired it, because there was a moment in there that I was like, oh no, what is she going to think? She hates us. It's wild.
When did you think you offended her?
When I brought up the fact that her parents weren't supporting her, and I went off on my little tangent, and then I wanted you to edit it out, and you were like, no, I'm leaving it. That was a tough one. I actually lost sleep over it, and I was like, I gotta just ask her. It's like,
So I have to ask you, Alicia, did you realize at the time that you were reaching back out to her that was a compulsion?
yeah, but I didn't care.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's an honest answer. Yeah, that's...
I should have just went with it and trusted Liam. I mean, he edits these. And I was like, well, I don't know if that's enough. I need to hear it directly from her. So That's how OCD shows up for me a lot is, I'm not able to sit with the uncertainty, unfortunately.
Well, Alicia's still in the thick of it is the truth. And Jeff, so you've shared some of how this showed up in your career in, your 20s and 30s. When did it first show up for you? Obviously you didn't know it was OCD, but when you look back as a kid, did this show up for you?
It did. My earliest memory around OCD was, I believe I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was walking down a street in our hometown, and a car drove by, and a kid leaned out the window and said, "Hey, Jeff," and the car kept going. And I didn't catch who the kid was. And I asked my mom and my sister who were with me at the time, and they were paying no attention, so they had no idea. And the next day at school, I went and asked all my buddies, "Hey, Mike, was that you who waved to me on San Mateo Avenue?" "No, it wasn't me." "Greg, was that you?" "No." "Steve?" "No." No one copped to saying hello to me on the street. And that following night, I started reviewing in my head this whole scene of the car driving down the road, the boy leaning out the window. I could just about see his face, but I couldn't quite. I could hear his voice trailing off like a train whistle as the car went down the street. And I couldn't figure it out. And that night, and the night after that, and the night after that, and the night after that, I lay awake just replaying in my head the sequence, trying to figure out who this kid was. And I remember my mom coming into the room at one point, maybe a week later, and realizing I was still awake. And she says, "Why aren't you sleeping?" And I said, "I'm still trying to figure out who the kid was." And she's like, "What kid?" And I said, the kid on San Mateo Avenue. And she says, "Are you afraid that kid was trying to scare you or do something detrimental in some way?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "No." And then she asked me a question that in retrospect was really a profound moment, because she said, "Why do you need to know?" And I told her, "I don't know why I need to know, but it feels like I need to know." And I think that was my first brush with OCD. And mental checking would become my most predominant compulsion over the years to follow. I mean, hence the name of the book, Rewind, Replay, Repeat. I would mentally review things in my life over and over again, checking for reassurance, in much the same way that Alicia talked about with checking whether or not she had said something offensive. It was just trying to remove that uncertainty, because uncertainty is uncomfortable, right?
Before you knew the name of your condition, how did you make sense of it in your own head? How long did that go on before you realized it was OCD?
It's a great question. So back in the 70s, when we're talking about my childhood, there really was no vernacular for what we now know to be OCD. I mean, certainly not at the layperson level. My parents didn't have that framework to work with. And so the running joke in our house was Jeff gets worried when he has nothing to worry about. I was the classic worrier. And that worked. And it was almost sort of endearing and kind of cute, but it wasn't fun for me. But interestingly, and there are different theories about this, of course, whether I had childhood OCD and then later on had adult onset OCD, but I had a period of dormancy with my OCD, high school and college, that were basically what I used to call my normal years. I've now learned that nobody is quote unquote normal, but my non-OCD years were about 8 years of high school and college. But when, let's see, when you asked, how did I come to, so as a kid, I thought about it as just classic worrying. As an adult, I had no idea, and it was scary because I was, one of the ironies of OCD, as you both know so well, is that we who battle these obsessions and compulsions are acutely and painfully aware of how ridiculous they are, right? I mean, intellectually, we understand that this stuff makes no sense. And that adds that layer of self-awareness where you're like, what the hell am I doing? And so I was misdiagnosed a couple of times, and we can talk more about that whole pathway. But ultimately, it was, I found myself in a book, The Boy Who Couldn't Stop Washing by Dr. Judith Rappaport. And one of you mentioned the fact that, the driving thing is real common. Well, fortunately for me, when I was reading this book, the very first chapter in that book is about a guy driving down a highway, turning his car around and checking over and over again to make sure he hadn't run somebody over. And it was so uncanny for me that I kid you not, my first thought was, I don't remember writing this book. I mean, I couldn't even fathom that somebody else did this crazy stuff that I do. And so that's when things started turning, is when I had a name for it. And I read in that book that not only is there a name for it, and not only am I not the only person who does this, but there's actually a treatment process for it. And so that was just this huge aha moment in my life.
How old were you when that happened?
I was in my late 20s.
You were already doing TV at that point.
Radio.
No, radio, right. You were
Face for
already doing
radio. Just remember
Right,
that.
you got to remember that. What else were you doing? You had the checking while you were driving. How else was it showing up for you?
Oh, gosh, it was showing up in so many ways. Most of it went back to checking or reassurance seeking or mental checking. But I came to call myself Captain Hazard because I would try to report or confess or fix any hazard I could find. And I write in my book about one experience that was just a real low point for me, which was I was walking through downtown San Francisco in the rain, and I inadvertently, well, of course inadvertently, dropped a piece of the Reese's peanut butter cup that I was eating. And my Captain Hazard said that somebody could slip on that and fall. So in downtown San Francisco, on a busy street corner, I got on my hands and knees and was looking for the little shard of chocolate that somebody might hurt themselves on. I mean, that's how ridiculous it was. And again,
You look
there's that
crazy,
self-awareness.
but you're just trying to protect somebody from getting hurt.
I know. And you know what, Alicia, the problem with that is that, so often I would tell people about my concerns, or I would confess, okay, can I give you one more? This confession stuff is so good.
Yes.
So I went into a grocery store once on a rainy day, and I had my umbrella with me, and I usually did everything I could to make sure that no water would drop from my umbrella. I'd put it in a plastic bag and make sure that, I was covering my tracks and whatnot. But I got to the checkout counter, and I looked down, and there were two dime-sized puddles of water, spots of water.
Oh, no.
And I started freaking out. And you guys know how this works. The doubt bully, again, you'll hear me refer to that, the voice of my OCD, would say, if you don't report this, you will never have peace in your life, right? I mean, that's the whole game.
Right.
So I tell the cashier, I said, I just have to let you know that my umbrella's dropping some water on the floor here. So the next thing I know, code 9 aisle 7, code 9 aisle 7, guy shows up with a mop and a bucket, and he can't find the spots, and I can't find the spots to tell him either. I'm like, well, somewhere down
You
there.
make a bigger mess with the mop and bucket than you
Oh
made.
my God. So yeah, I mean, the OCD was just going nuts in all kinds of different ways, reporting, checking, replaying, confessing. Yeah, it was all over the place.
I want to go back to the moment when you said that it went dormant in your college years for about 8 years. You lived a normal life. I'm so fascinated. I hear a lot of these stories where people either had OCD postpartum, or it went away, or it was really loud during certain years. What do you think contributes to our OCD being louder versus it going away? And why do you think that it didn't show up for you during those years?
It's a great question, and I honestly wish I had a better answer for you than I do. And I've heard different theories. I mean, if I've got this right, there is a theory that you can have periods of dormancy in just OCD in general. If you have OCD, if you're born with it and you're wired that way, it can wax and wane over the course of your lifetime. And I've also learned that there is a camp that believes that there is childhood OCD and then there is adult onset OCD, and that maybe I quote unquote grew out of my childhood OCD. I honestly don't know. As an adult,
we know stress plays a role, but if you're in school, I mean, that's a very stressful situation, and it flared up for Liam during his stressful news days. And for me, being a mom is very stressful, and it's really loud right now, but I don't think it was as loud in my 20s. And I'm just trying to figure out like how much of a role does lifestyle and stress play with our...
It's a great question. And I will tell you that for the adult onset OCD, I think it was 28 or so when this started happening as an adult, I had just become a father. And I do hear anecdotally from so many people over the years that there is that sort of connection in terms of, the ultimate responsibility of taking care of another human being and the stress.
There's so
that
much to
creates.
worry about.
Yeah.
Mine started raging like crazy after our daughter was born, our first child. I became obsessed with SIDS, And so
Yeah.
I would be looking through the slats in her crib all night. I would
Mhm.
I would look through the slats, make sure her chest was moving, get back into bed. 5 minutes later, I'd go, no, but she probably stopped breathing, and I'd go back. I mean, all night. My wife had
Yeah.
a great time during that period with me getting in and out of the
Wow.
bed
Bath
while she's
time was a
trying to.
big one for me. Bath
Oh,
time,
bath
I
time.
thought, oh my God, they could drown if I took my eyes off them, or if like, what if I
Oh,
got
yeah.
some weird urge and like held them under, which is just I can't even say that out loud, but you're like, okay, that was a weird thought. I'm gonna just like put my hands behind my back while I give them a bath.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
OCD, again, if you look at it as a bully, the bully goes after what matters
We
most to you.
love.
So it
Yeah.
makes sense that, for a new parent, that becomes a great problem.
That's exactly
But
right.
it's
So,
tough.
so in your 20s, you have this new onset of it, and the symptoms that you had experienced as a child start to come back. You didn't have a name for it. So, what did you make of it? Did you think, I'm going insane? Did you think you were being punished by something? What did you make of it, and what led up to that moment where you finally knew what it
Breaking
was?
point? Yeah.
Yeah, great questions. So there was a particular episode, and I don't think there's anything special about this episode. It's all about the timing in my mind. But a buddy of mine had gotten tickets to go see a 49ers playoff game. And I was really excited about this. And the Niners used to play in San Francisco at a place called Candlestick Park,
Candlestick,
which
yeah.
was a wonderful ballpark. But I was way too cheap to spend the money for stadium parking. So I parked about a mile away in a residential area. And I started walking to the stadium. And about halfway there, the thought entered my mind that maybe I hadn't set the parking brake. And I had never not set the parking brake. There was no reason for me to think that. So sort of working back, as they call emotional reasoning in the OCD world, that, the emotion was really strong. This felt like this is something I needed to address. So like, something must not be right. I better go back and check. So I walked back a half mile and looked in the window and saw that the parking brake was set. And I felt better. You get a little payoff there, right? And I started heading back to the stadium. And about halfway there again, for maximum inconvenience, the doubt bully says, well, you looked through the window, but you didn't, actually check to make sure that the thing was really in the full upright position. And I'm like, what is going on? But again, it felt so real. The emotion was so compelling around this that I thought, and then the doubt bully drops this one. If you don't go back and check, you'll never be able to enjoy that game. I'm like, well, that's true. So I go back. The long and the short of it is I missed almost the first quarter of this playoff game that I wanted to see.
Oh my
And
God.
and that was the first time that self-awareness came in. I thought, what was that about? I mean, why am I going crazy? Am I going
Yeah.
crazy? So I just kind of set that aside. And then before I knew it, and this happened pretty quickly, the OCD started going in all different directions. So it was checking and reassurance seeking. I mean, terms I wouldn't have used back then, but I remember trying to write a check and put it in an envelope, for example. So I'd write the check and for the mortgage or something that had some import to it. I'd write the check and put it in the envelope, and I'd think to myself, did I sign the check? So I open up the envelope and I take out the check and I see that it's fine. I put it in another envelope. I went through like a half box of envelopes once, only to want to dive into my mailbox outside on the street, just to make sure and pull it back out again. Don't do that. That is not allowed by the U.S. Postal Service. So I knew something was wrong, but I had been, my father was in the insurance business. And there was this analogy that there was always this permanent record people had of you. And only the people that are really important in your life have access to this permanent file of yours. And I was just deathly afraid of what would happen if I went and saw a psychologist. I mean, I would have never imagined we'd be talking all these years later openly about OCD. And so I went to see a psychologist very reluctantly. And when I think back on that first experience, I mean, it must have just been comical to anybody in the neighborhood because I literally parked blocks away and snaked my way through alleys so that nobody could see that I was going to the psychologist's office. I must have looked like a criminal. I mean, it's comical when I think about it. But I got there safely without
You're in
being
a
discovered.
disguise. You have a Groucho Marx disguise with glasses and a mustache.
You know what, Liam? I should have done that. It would have been just as obvious, or what I was doing was just as obvious. So I get there, and I called this first psychologist Dr. X in my book. And Dr. X is kind of a tough guy. I think I heard he was a former parole officer or something. And at first that made me feel good. And I thought, oh, he must think I'm a wimp, you know, and then I got all this garbage going around that, and the male bravado and so forth. But Dr. X and I got off to just a fine start for the first 2 minutes until he pulled out his yellow pad. And then I started thinking, okay, that's going in my permanent file. So I was very careful about what I shared with Dr. X. But interestingly, by the second or third meeting we had, a little light bulb went off for him. He says, I think I know what's going on for you. And I said, oh, tell me. And he says, I think you've got a fear of success. And I'm thinking, you know, as psychiatric hangups go, that sounds like a pretty noble one. So I'm going to go with that. Yeah. That's good. And of course, I knew that wasn't it. But I thought it was interesting in retrospect that he came up with that diagnosis so quickly. So I left after about 4 sessions, and I thought, you know, this is not going to solve my problems. I still had no idea what was going on. Tried to soldier on for a while, and then realized I had some serious issues that needed to be addressed. Again, still thinking I'm crazy. Nothing about OCD or anxiety disorders on the horizon. More just, you know, cuckoo's nest crazy. So I went to see a second psychologist, and I call her Dr. Y in the book, and have affectionately nicknamed her Dr. How Does That Make You Feel? Because she was a traditional therapist, talk therapist. I've got nothing against talk therapy. It's a wonderful tool. But as we know in the OCD world, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, ERP, all these various pragmatic tools are what work. And talk therapy was not the right answer here. But we did this dance where I would tell her, and at this point, this was months later, I would be much more specific about, you know, what I was going through. And that was tough because she too had a yellow pad. And I was still worried about that permanent record getting in there. But, you know, I would tell her, I'm driving my car around the block and checking to make sure I close the garage door. And she'd say, well, how does that make you feel? And I would tell her, you know, gosh, doc, I keep checking and rechecking the appliances at night. Well, how does that make you feel? Over and over again, we did this dance. And in fact, at one point, I got a bill for a session that I actually couldn't have been at. I was out of town, and I talked to her after the session. I said, you know, I got overbilled for something. She says,
how does that make you feel?
So anyway, we did this dance over and over again. And you know, I know people watching are going, well, wouldn't she say maybe this is OCD? Well, to be fair to her, this is going back a whole bunch of years. This is back in the 90s, but still. So ultimately, she stumbles across a treatment protocol that proves to be effective. She takes vacation. Because while she's on vacation, the investigative reporter in me decides I'm going to get to the bottom of this story. So that's when I wound up in a bookstore in the psychology section, again with my glasses on that you were talking about, Liam, my disguise on, because I didn't want anyone to see me in a psychology section of a bookstore. But I'm going through the book stacks and nothing seems to fit. I'm not battling postpartum depression, not loss of a loved one. You know, then this book with a bright orange spine just jumps off the shelf at me because it says, The Boy Who Couldn't Stop Washing. And I was not washing in those days. That came later. But something about the words couldn't stop really spoke to me, that reference to compulsion. And so I pulled the book down, and that's when I ran across that first story about the guy driving his car in circles. At this point, I am breaking down hysterically, and I don't care if the whole world sees me, because in that moment I realize, A, I'm not the only person who does this, B, there's a name for it, and C, there's a treatment process. I bring it home, I share it with my wife. She's in tears, nodding her head. You know, that's what's going on. This is an important breakthrough for us. Dr. Y comes back from vacation. I go to see her. I say, Doc, I ran across something and I can see the wheels turning in her head. Oh gosh, here comes another patient trying to figure out what's going on with themselves. And I say OCD, and she says, OC what? I say OCD. And I said, I hope you understand, Doc, at this point, I need to go find somebody I can work with on this front. And as I'm walking to the door, I'm thinking, ask me now how I feel. Ask me now. To her credit, and this could not have been an easy call at all, the next day she did call me and say, I've been talking to some colleagues and there's something to what you've been, discovering on your own there, and you should pursue that. And I share all this not to ridicule Dr. Y, but just to talk about the need for the mental health field and providers to recognize things. I mean, in the best of all worlds, the way that would play out today, if I went to see a talk therapist who didn't specialize in OCD, he or she might recognize it at least and say, I'm going to refer you to Dr. Johnson, who does,
Sure.
cognitive behavioral therapy and so forth. So after all of that, I'll wrap the story up real quickly here, but after all of that, the first call I made was to the International OCD Foundation, which, a very serendipitous arc of my life, I was able to serve for 8 years as a national spokesperson and board member because that organization saved my life. They pointed me in the right direction to a therapist in my area who did treat OCD, a CBT specialist, and things started turning around. And that's sort of my journey through the psychiatric world early on to get to the point of treatment.
Quick break. We'll be right back. But first, a word from our sponsor.
The same distressing, unwanted thoughts keep playing over and over in your mind. The same rituals keep eating up your time, holding you back from enjoying your life. You've tried talk therapy before and spent session after session diving into those thoughts, trying to understand them, trying to fix them, but somehow they just get worse. And the shame piles on because you think, why isn't this working? What's wrong with me? If this sounds familiar, here's what you need to know. You are not the problem. You're experiencing something that a lot of people with OCD experience. Getting your life back is possible because OCD is highly treatable. It just requires a completely different approach than other mental health conditions. In fact, standard talk therapy often makes OCD worse because it encourages you to analyze those intrusive thoughts or try to replace them with positive ones. But with OCD, the more attention you give the thoughts, the stickier they become. That's where NoCD comes in. NoCD provides virtual therapy designed specifically for OCD. Every single one of their therapists is extensively trained in a type of therapy called ERP, or exposure and response prevention, which is the most effective treatment available for OCD. And they get their training from world-renowned OCD experts, so they truly understand what you're dealing with, even the stuff that feels impossible to say out loud. In live, face-to-face virtual sessions, your NoCD therapist will teach you how to take the power away from intrusive thoughts so you can live the life you want to live. In between sessions, you'll be able to message your therapist anytime, join dozens of live support groups, and continue your progress with other expert-developed therapy tools. NoCD is also covered by insurance for over 138 million Americans, and their team makes it really simple to get started. Visit nocd.com and book a free 15-minute call. That's nocd.com to learn more and talk to someone who can help, because you deserve treatment that actually works for OCD. And now, back to our show. So you go and finally find someone who specializes in OCD. What was that first treatment program like, and how quickly did you get relief?
Well, the first story that I like to tell is my very first encounter with this doctor, because we sat across a table in a couch and chair, and I said, there's something you need to know before we get started. And she kind of looked back at me with a very knowing look and said, what's that? And I said, I have absolutely no interest in telling you about my childhood. And she looked just deadpan back at me, good, because I have no interest in hearing about it. Now, that was code speak, right? I mean, I was saying, I don't want to do more talk therapy. And she was saying, I don't want to do talk therapy with you. I want to talk about what's going on right now, the behaviors, the thought patterns, and so forth. And of course, there is a place for talking about our childhood and, those sorts of issues and how they shaped our OCD journeys. But I got the sense that she'd been there with a number of other patients before. And so she educated me about what OCD is, how it's treated, what the various options are for treatment, what the goals are, and so forth. And then we started doing sessions once or twice a week. And I'd love to tell you that turned everything around for me quickly and permanently. It did not. And one of the reasons that it did not happen, because I was basically paying a lot of money to go in and lie to my therapist week after week about doing the homework. And in fact, I was just going through the sections. So shameless plug for the book, but when it Rewind, Replay, Repeat, and she writes the afterword of it, Dr. Jackie Persons, and it's been wonderful to have that relationship with her post treatment, where she was able to provide the perspective of a therapist who herself was very frustrated, not understanding why I wasn't breaking through on a number of fronts more quickly and efficiently than she had hoped, or that I wasn't doing this to the level that she'd hoped and expected. And as she says in the afterword, I now know that he was lying to me. And she talked about the lessons for her too, that OCD treatment is only as good as its ability to keep people motivated to go through it.
Mm-hmm. And, what were you lying about? Just the work that you weren't doing as far as exposing yourself through those?
She would give. Yeah, so for driving, for example, there were a couple of times where we went out driving together, as I recall, and we drive down a road with potholes and the exposure response prevention. So that would be the exposure to a trigger. What if that was somebody I hit? And the response prevention would be, okay, Jeff, we're not going to go back and look at that. We're going to keep going. And so we did those exercises together. And then she would say, I want you to go out and do that on a bumpy road 3 times this week. And I'd come back the following week and say, yeah, I did that. And no, I didn't.
You didn't do it because it was too difficult, too stressful, or why did you not do it?
Because I was lacking the motivation. I was getting through her and traditional OCD treatment the how of how to treat OCD, but was missing for me was the why. And that became a big part of my outreach later on, what I came to call greater good motivation, and the whole idea of looking at the reasons why it makes sense for us to do the hard work of OCD therapy. So I was missing that why, and it's hard. I mean, let's not sugarcoat this. OCD treatment is difficult. You're asked to sit with your very worst fears. And we now know that there's this habituation phenomenon that works. When you sit with your worst anxiety, it dissipates all on its own. We've got brain scans that confirm that. There's this, what I call the uncertainty paradox, which is the only way to effectively navigate uncertainty is to embrace that uncertainty. And that's what OCD therapy is really all about, but it's tough work. So I was, to answer your point, Alicia, I was lying about doing the homework over and over again. And so I wasn't getting better. And that was frustrating for her. I ultimately left her and left therapy and overall, and then later went back to her with a whole new attitude about ready to do the hard work. And that made all the difference. And I did start turning my life around very quickly at that juncture.
What made you go back? Things just got so bad?
Yes. So I'll fast forward my story a little bit here. In the summer of 1997, I was living in Sacramento. I had left KCBS in San Francisco because it was just too stressful to do that field reporting driving. And I just didn't want to put myself through that. I had an opportunity to get a really cushy job sitting in a studio, being a full-time anchor at KFBK in Sacramento. And so I took that opportunity. And, it was avoidance in a lot of ways. And we know that avoidance is the ultimate compulsion, right? Mm-hmm. And because you're trying to avoid that discomfort, you're trying to avoid sitting with that anxiety.
Hold on one sec. So you were still taking the cab after already seeing the therapist that told you to expose yourself to the uncomfortable. You were still like, I know what I need to be doing, but I'm still going to take the cab. Okay.
Yes.
And then that got okay. And that interfered so much with your job. Then you decided, I'm going to just eliminate that. I'm going to avoid that situation, right? Yep. Quit that job. And now you're
Move the whole family to a smaller market. Again, in the whole news business, everything's about market size. I went from market 4 to market, whatever 27 or something. I don't remember. But yeah, arguably not a great career move to leave a place like KCBS. But I did it because I was avoiding. I mean, that was a safer route for me. So I went up there, when was that? 94, 95. So a couple of years into that, share kind of a scene that plays out like a scene from a movie for me, because I've thought about it so many times. In 1997, on a hot, sticky August night, I was in my backyard in Sacramento in a hammock, staring up at the mighty heavens. And I remember blurting out these words: Show me how to turn around this crazy life, and I'll share my story with anyone who will listen. And I didn't know where that came from. I mean, I was at my wit's end. I had been through 5 therapists at that point, on and off different medications. I'd read every book there was to read about anxiety, and no one or nothing could fix me. That was my mindset. No one or nothing could fix me. It wasn't about what I wasn't doing. It was about what the rest of the world wouldn't do for me. I wanted the magic wand. So here I am blurting this out there, and, I waited a couple of days, and the little instruction book did not come drifting down from the mighty heavens. But something sort of profound did happen, and that was I turned that bargain on its head, and I said to myself, you know what? I'm in a good position to share a story about getting better from OCD, to help educate people about what it's like to live with this disorder and so forth, and what it takes to get better. I'm in radio. I've got what they call a platform. I'm comfortable storytelling, all of that. Great position to go tell a story about getting better from OCD. Only one small problem. I have no success story to share. So I put the proverbial cart ahead of the horse and said, I am going to get better so I can share my story and give some purpose to all that I've been through. And it wasn't all that clear to me then as it is now, but I made a couple of commitments, and I told myself I was going to journal for a year and take note of every obsession, every compulsion, every triumph, every setback, every observation along the way. And I did that. I filled shoeboxes full of 3x5 cards in a very obsessive-compulsive personality disorder kind of way, where they were all neatly stacked and categorized. But I went through this process, and a year later, I was not cured of OCD. I was working, and nothing magic happened. I went back and worked with Jackie. The only difference in my work with Jackie Persons, the therapist that I was working with, the second go around was that I had that why. This was why I was going to get better, so I could help other people. And lo and behold, at the end of the 1 year of journaling, I was not cured, not by a long shot. But the 3x5 cards that I used to fill up with obsessions, so much so that I was writing in the little margins as small as I could to every obsession and compulsion I was doing. By the end, there were days that there were 1 or 2 entries on those. I mean, huge difference. My doubt bully said, you're a failure. You didn't cure yourself from OCD. Intellectually, I understood that something more powerful happened. I learned to live with the disorder, which is the way I like to look at it now. And so at that juncture, I spent another year stringing together those 3x5 cards into a really bad first draft of a book. Then I spent 9 more years writing and rewriting and rewriting the story until it was finally published in 2007, 10 years after what I came to call my bargain with the stars. But as it turns out, that whole concept was absolutely on track, because the more I started sharing my story, the stronger I got in battling my OCD, and the more I was able to navigate OCD on a day-to-day basis and live with this disorder in a very healthy way.
Yeah, I like how you talk about greater good motivation, and for you it was to be able to help other people going through it. My question, I guess, would be, why wasn't the pain it was causing for you and the suffering it was causing for you enough of a why? Because it sounds like it was pretty torturous.
Yes.
And to me, that would be motivation enough to say, all right, I'm going to go back to Jackie, and this time I'm actually going to do the homework, and I'm going to actually open up about what's going on inside here.
It is a great question, and you'd be a good reporter or news guy. Did you know that, man? Actually, both of you do a great job asking questions. For me, I think the answer, because I've thought about this a lot, and I think the answer was it was baked in already. I was already dealing with that motivation of wanting to be a good father, wanting to be a good husband, wanting to have a real career, wanting to address the pain. That was already baked into what I was working with. I think I needed to step outside of that. And I also think, and I know it sounds kind of trite, but I've founded a nonprofit years later called the Advocacy to Advocacy Alliance. And the tagline is, we help ourselves by helping others. And there is just, I've come to believe that the greatest motivator we have is a combination of purpose and service, and specifically the purpose that we derive from service to others. And I learned to pit purpose and service against fear and doubt. And that was the motivating factor that was missing for me all those years before. And I think largely because it was already baked into my particular scenario.
Mm-hmm. You took yourself out of the equation. You made it bigger than yourself. You served as a national spokesperson and board member for the IOCDF for 8 years. I'm curious what that role taught you about the community and about advocacy.
It was the most rewarding experience of my life, more than anything I did in radio, more than anything I've done since. It was grassroots advocacy at its best, and I don't mean what my role was. Well, I don't mean what I was bringing to the table as much as what was available for me through this opportunity. The OCD community is just amazing, and for anybody who has not been to an IOCDF conference or taken part in a Million Steps walk or something else that the IOCDF puts on, please take my advice, get involved at some level, and if not with the IOCDF, with other organizations that are doing OCD advocacy. There is something so powerful in connecting with other people who can understand. I mean, I'm guessing you two can relate to this very well, and that's that, I've been married to my wife for 35 plus years. There are things that she can't understand that the two of you who I'm meeting for the very first time today could understand like that. Mm-hmm. And that's not for lack of trying on my wife's part. Yeah. There's just something, it's so hard to get in the head of somebody with OCD and understand, I mean, how many times have you guys had somebody say to you with the best of intentions, just stop doing that. You're washing your hands, Jeff. Just stop washing your hands. You keep going driving your car in circles. Just stop doing it. Right?
Yeah.
So that whole aspect of community through the IOCDF was amazing. It's just a great organization as well. So to be able to travel the country and share my story and help other people discover themselves through that really kind of fueled that sense of purpose that I derived from the advocacy I was doing in that world.
Alicia, the number of times you and I have said to our spouses, Spence and Leah, I just wish you could spend one day in my brain so that you could feel what it's like and have that perspective so that when we're in that state, you can go, okay, I know what that is. Yeah. I wish that for people that they could understand. I mean, I don't wish OCD on my worst enemy, but maybe for a day.
No, we get it. We get it, Liam, just a little bit so you can understand us better in those hard moments. There's so much there that you said, and I feel like I jumped the gun. I don't do well relying on these, and I've told myself before, I'm going to throw these out and just have a natural conversation. It's so annoying. There was so much you said about intellect and fear, because intellectually you think that, you're smart. You want to be like, well, I can just hold on to the fact that I checked the car brake. Let's use that for example, the e-brake. Okay. You're smart. You know that you can go back, but I don't think people understand the magnitude of the feeling that we get, that you can't just talk yourself out of it.
I often say that intellect is the bullied little brother of emotion. They're both there for us, but the voice of the bully, the emotion voice, if you will, and we don't hear voices for anybody who's not familiar with OCD. We don't hear voices. So intellect is the bullied little brother of emotion. And I'm going to have a quick story about that. When my older daughter was just a year or so old, or even younger than that, I was at work and I got a call from my wife, who sounded panicked and said, I'm in the back of an ambulance with our daughter. I'm on the way to the hospital. Come meet me here. And that's about all I knew. So for all I knew, my daughter was about to die. I mean, my wife's panic in her voice
worst call
was clear
you can get.
Oh my God.
So I had to drive about 30 miles to get there. And this, by the way, is a story I didn't even put in the book because I was so embarrassed by it. But I share it now because people need to know exactly what you were saying, Alicia, which is the power of the compulsion. So as I'm turning into the hospital, to go see perhaps my daughter on her last breath, my car front tire hits the curb. I stop the car and I get out to start checking to make sure it's okay. I'm putting that ahead of my daughter, whose state I don't know at this moment, who's in the ER. As it turns out, it was a febrile seizure. It was not a big deal. She was fine, but I didn't know that at that moment. And I was so ashamed that I let my compulsive well, the compulsion there,
behavior.
drive what I was doing ahead of what taking care of my daughter, and that put everything into perspective for me. I mean, I think that's what you were getting at, Alicia,
That is
just
what
in
I was
terms
getting
of
at, like how strong it
intellectually I
is and takes
understood.
over.
Yeah,
Right. Intellectually, you're like, my daughter's in the hospital. She needs me. I need to be there. That was the goal. But then
right.
you had this, this intrusive thought come in and it takes over. It takes over. It is, I
Well, in some
describe it
ways,
to Liam as like an alien in my mind that I'm like
hmm.
constantly battling with.
No, in some ways that makes it worse too, because you know that the thought or the intrusive thought is not real. On some level, you know it, and yet you have the sensation in your body of the anxiety of it. And so then, as Jeff was saying, you then also carry the shame of the fact
Yeah.
that you performed the compulsion or the ritual despite knowing it wasn't real. It's like, whew, yeah, it's really,
Well, it
it's
would put
really
us in a
quite the
different
cycle.
category if we didn't have the insight.
That's
If
right. That's right.
right, and I mean that would probably lead over to psychosis or some other diagnosis that we are grateful we don't have. I'm grateful that I have that insight because that we can get better because of it.
And, and I think that's a great reminder for all of us that we should be grateful that we have that insight.
Yeah.
It is difficult to navigate, but we're lucky that we have that insight.
And,
Where are
Jeff,
you
as
now,
part of
Jeff, with your OCD, and how does that show up for you, and does it at all?
It does. I'm really, really careful to never say that I'm cured of my OCD because I personally don't believe that's how it works. I think the goal is to learn how to navigate it, to live with it, and not to get rid of it. Because honestly, I think that trying to get rid of it is in and of itself a trap. I became so fixated on when I let go of that fixation to try to be cured of OCD, I was all but cured of OCD. I would be lying if I didn't say, or if I said I didn't have days that are difficult still and that I still face obsessions that want me to go do compulsions. And occasionally I do the compulsions, but my life is 180 degrees better than it was the worst of my OCD. I still drive. I challenge myself every day to take on some kind of new trigger and deal with it. I'm in a good place, but I'm not cured.
Yeah, that's an interesting debate within the
Mhm.
OCD community. Is it
Yeah.
something you can cure,
We just
or
had this
are you?
chat.
Yeah, we just had Dr. Liz Mackingvale on, and I don't know if you've interacted
Oh,
with
I know.
her.
I love Liz. We worked together as spokespeople for the IOCDF for
Yeah,
years and
she is
years.
wonderful, and she's got this perspective that you want to get freedom, not function, right? And so she's careful about the term curable as well, but I think her perspective is that you can get pretty much total freedom from OCD, and she and I had this debate about whether or not that creates false expectations for a person, as opposed to trying to just get to a place where it doesn't rule your life in the way it used to. You can function, you can do what you need to do, and of course it's going to creep back in every once in a while, and then you don't have the letdown when it does, that, oh no, here it is again. So I totally get her perspective, to some extent I think it's a debate about semantics.
I was just going to say that same thing, and I know Liz in her outreach over the years, and I think that really does boil down to semantics. But yeah, I mean, I think the goal, and maybe for me, part of it is just what we focus on, because that in of itself becomes part of the challenge. And again, when I focused too much on trying to prove to myself that I was rid of the OCD, that became a trap.
Yes.
But I also don't think I think to the other side of this coin, it's really important to say, and perhaps this was part of what Liz might have been getting at as well, is that we don't want to settle. I mean, I've at times in my life, well, when I moved to Sacramento, that was me
Right.
saying, well, I've got this disorder, I'm going to have to live with it. I'm just going to stop putting myself through some triggers. And I honestly believe that we need to keep challenging ourselves all the time, and it gets easier and easier. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think semantics is probably at the core of that.
Is there something you wish the public would know about OCD, that even despite your years of advocacy, you think the public still doesn't quite get it?
Oh, yeah.
What would you like to tell them if there's someone listening who doesn't have OCD?
OCD is not an adjective. That's what I want to say. I think of all the blog posts I've ever posted for Psychology Today, that one got more traction than anything. That was years ago. And it's just that so often today we hear people say, oh, my boyfriend is so OCD about his car, or, my mother's OCD about her kitchen. OCD does not mean fastidious. It does not mean anal retentive. It is not an adjective. Your boyfriend may have OCD, and that may show up in the way he takes care of his car. But the mere fact that he's fastidious or anal retentive about keeping it clean does not make it OCD. OCD is a biological, neurological brain disorder. And I think for so many people that I'm in contact with in the OCD community, there's a real concern that it diminishes what we're going through to just say, oh, yeah. What Alicia and Liam are talking about is the same as my boyfriend who likes to wax his car once a week.
Well, and it keeps people from getting the proper help. I mean, for so long, I didn't know that what I was experiencing was OCD because I thought it was, keeping your closet organized or you were a neat freak. And I suffered because of that. So we have to speak up and break the stigma and educate people big time.
And you know what? You two are doing that with this podcast. So kudos to you.
Yay.
That's the idea. Yeah, let more people know what it is, how debilitating it can be, and that there is help through ERP. So for someone listening right now who feels stuck in a loop, Jeff, they've got doubt, they're checking, what's your first suggestion to them? Something they could do today that might get them on the path to feeling better?
Do this one simple thing. Go to iocdf.org. I'm no longer, a formal part of the organization. I'm not here to push any organization over another, but it is the clearinghouse right now of information and the best starting point I know of for getting information, good information, solid information about OCD. Get some answers. And I'm so glad that we're sort of bringing it full circle to the fact that this is treatable, because the bad news about OCD treatment is it's difficult. I don't want to sugarcoat that. I think we've been very candid about that today. The good news is it works. It's empirically supported. And so anecdotally, in 10 years or whatever, it's been 15 years of OCD advocacy now, I have seen lives turned around beyond my own as well. By people who got proper treatment, and proper is the key word there. But this is a very treatable disorder. It takes a lot of work. You got to be committed to it. You got to find your why. You need to know what your greater good motivation is, for example. But find that, do the hard work with a trained professional, get the right therapy, and you will find that your life can turn around.
Are we wrapping this up? I'm not ready to say goodbye. Jeff.
I know.
When you find your people, we just want to go hang out and have burgers with you and chat about all the weird shit we've done. This is not enough time. Jeff, where can listeners find your books, your writings, and your advocacy work?
Thank you for asking. JeffBellOnline.com. JeffBellOnline.com. And that has a kind of a springboard for various advocacy projects that I'm involved with, both with OCD and with Parkinson's now. And again, there are a lot of lessons to be learned.
Yeah. How has that intersected? When did you get the diagnosis of Parkinson's, and has it made the OCD louder as a result of that challenge? How have those intersected, if at all?
It's interesting. They come and go in different ways. Well, the PD is more consistent. The OCD comes and goes more easily. But I think the greatest lesson, and in the interest of time, I won't share too much on this front here, but with OCD, a big part of the recovery process for me was learning what's in my control and what's not in my control. I cannot say I don't want to have obsessions. I do not believe, we know that. You tell someone, don't think about a pink elephant, and what are they thinking about, a pink elephant? Yeah. You can't will away an intrusive thought. So that's not in my control. But what is in my control is my willful choice not to indulge a compulsion. And that was, at the core of what I learned about OCD treatment. I find that applies not only in OCD, but in battling any adversity. What's in your control and what's not? Yeah. I cannot not have Parkinson's disease. I got it. That was part of my path. But I can choose how I respond to that diagnosis. I can do everything I can to slow the progression, to take care of myself, to stay informed, to find ways to advocate on behalf of other people with PD or whatever that other challenge might be. There are some universal themes when it comes to what I've come to call greater good motivation. And that theme is just, again, put the purpose in the service ahead of the fear and doubt, whatever that adversity is. And so if I can just put one more plug in, it would be for people to check out the Adversity to Advocacy website, which is a2alliance.org. And, we've got a whole group of people who are navigating OCD who are part of the organization, and folks navigating all kinds of other adversities. And the whole concept is we help ourselves by helping others.
I love that message. Excellent. Jeff, this has been wonderful. We had a feeling that you were going to be an amazing storyteller, and just with all of your history of sharing your story, and it did not disappoint. We've really enjoyed this time together.
I really appreciate your having me on this podcast. I'm proud of you both. I'm just getting to know you now, but I'm really proud of you both for speaking your truth and sharing your stories, and you're going to make a huge difference.
Hey,
Hey,
he was awesome. What a
that was
storyteller,
so
huh?
good. I'm happy with that. I didn't feel like I was too in my head either. A couple moments, but
No,
nothing
no, no.
bad.
He's just so warm, and then, like I said, he has got that radio voice, and he's used to telling stories. So that was excellent.
Liam, you had your first therapy session with no CD on Monday. How'd it go?
It was really good. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, the first session is really the background, right? So you're just
Right.
laying the framework. She wanted to know about family history, what my history with OCD is, some of my compulsions and intrusive thoughts, how those have played out, when they were loudest in my life, what I've done for therapy to this point, my medication history. So it was really just kind of like a laying the groundwork type meeting. But
Okay.
what was interesting is you and I have talked a fair amount about our doubt of whether or not we actually have OCD,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really common thing with OCD. Apparently, a lot of people with OCD are like, do I have OCD or not? Am I a faker?
So
Am I
weird.
malingering somehow?
Yeah.
And I that had been setting in for me the last like few months because I'm in a pretty good place. And so then I was like, maybe I just don't even have OCD anymore. And that was all just a fever dream or something. And
But is it possible that your symptoms are 90% better? You still have OCD, but it's just not as loud.
yeah. And what was so helpful about this session, to be honest, was she goes, okay, so tell me about the first time a compulsion or an obsession popped up for you. And then I walked her through my fear of my parents dying as a kid and what I did around that and the repeated prayers and all the checking that I did. And then I told her about this phase that I had in high school when I was obsessed with school and I would create these flashcards, but then the way I would write them and they had to be in blue ink, and then I had to write the clue 4 lines, and so I'd like sometimes have one word on a line so I could make it to 4 lines, and I had to memorize them a certain number of times, and I had to have it, and I'm going through it and she's just nodding along. And then I got to the compulsions that I was having later in life, my relationship OCD stuff, and the whole time she's just nodding, and then she's like, yes, I mean, as you know, very obvious OCD. And then she just keeps going, but for me I was like, oh good, okay, I do have OCD.
Yeah.
It was so
Yeah.
stupid that I
Yeah,
spent
you're
the last
doubting
few months.
yourself. Yeah, that's crazy how it pops in like that. That is OCD in itself.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Which is
yeah, of
it's
course,
like
yeah.
it's so fucked up.
Like
Oh my.
remember you were having the whole thing about like, what if we're just frauds and we're having a
hmm
podcast
Like I'm just lying
about
to
OCD
everybody.
and we don't even have it.
But you know what my reassurance is? It's when we do these interviews and I'm just relating to everybody. I'm like, well, if
Oh yeah,
she has it
exactly.
and she's telling me, then that must be it. Yeah, it is the doubt disease for sure on every level. That's why I love talking to Jeff because sometimes we get these people with these subtypes or themes and that's the only thing that they experience, whether it's metaphobia or emetophobia or whatever it may be. His bounced around everywhere. That's how mine is. My OCD latches
Mm,
onto every theme in my life, relationship,
yeah.
harm, and I think it's interesting that he said that 8 years went by where he didn't experience OCD. There's something to be said about that. And I'm like, is that a inflammation thing? Is that a stress induced thing? But then again, he was in school. So I'm trying to be detective over here going, what causes the flare-ups and why does it go away sometimes and sometimes it's stickier than others? I
Yeah,
don't
you know
get
what's
that.
interesting though is I think that that's probably true for most mental health issues, right? So people who experience depression, they have periods of time where they're not
Yeah.
depressed. People who experience, I don't know, bipolar disorder, they
I
have
guess
periods
for
of
me,
time
it
where
just
it's
leaves
much
too
more
much
intense.
room. Yeah, but if it's quiet for 8 years, it can be quiet for 10, 15, 20. I just don't understand how and why it creeps back, you know? And I think to have those moments of where it's quiet, I would like to get a brain scan then and compare it to like what can we just like
Yeah,
form a pill of that biology within that moment so I can take that?
they should do a brain
Like
scan of the
chemicals are
person when they're
perfect.
OCD. Yeah, do a brain scan of the person when the OCD is quiet and then make a
Yeah.
mold of it. Then
Yeah.
clone that brain. Then then cut my skull open, put that brain in,
Are
attach
you
it
making
to
fun
my
of me right
spinal
now? Because
column.
that's how ridiculous I just sounded. Fuck you,
I
Liam. Fuck
wish.
you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the OCD Confessional. Be sure to follow this show so you get new episodes. You can subscribe to us on YouTube or find us on Instagram and TikTok at the OCD Confessional.